Hello, welcome to SHOWstudio. It's Paris Fashion Week and it's my favourite show, yay! We're going to be talking about Comme Des Garcons. I shouldn't have said it's my favourite show because now that means I'm going to have to be really positive and beat positivity out of my panel. But yeah, really exciting show to talk about because the amazing Ray Kawakubo. And I've got an amazing set of panellists with me as well to talk about what's going on in Paris. But before we start discussing and dissecting, I'll let you guys introduce yourselves, starting with you, Lucy.
Okay. Hello, my name's Lucy. I'm a trend forecaster and fashion historian.
I'm Dal Chodha and I'm a fashion writer.
I'm Dilys Williams. I'm the director at Centre for Sustainable Fashion.
And I'm Knight. I'm the director of SHOWstudio.
So I'm going to start by asking, have we been impressed by what we've seen in Paris so far? Because you were saying that you really liked the Dior show from last night.
I did. I've been really impressed by some of the beautiful embroidery. I thought the embroidery in Dior was fantastic. And a lot of the print in Margiela I thought was lovely. Dries, I always love Dries. And yeah, I thought that looked particularly amazing.
Yeah.
Couple of things that I was slightly disappointed about. I think for Mr. Anderson, I think probably quite a lot for him to have taken on in one season, but I think that will kind of maybe come through the next season. I'd also like, what was I going to say? I liked Christophe Lemaire.
Yeah.
Christophe Lemaire I thought looked really beautiful.
Very beautiful.
And just, yeah, very easy as well.
How about you, Dal? Have you been casting your eye, or do you just wait for Com?
No. More than the things that I like, I'm kind of just really still upset about V&A.
Really?
Yes.
Tell me.
I'm just, it's for me again. It highlights things that I've talked about on the panel before. But this idea of when a house has closed its doors and then they're prized open decades later by businessmen or women or people with money rather than any sort of artistic sensibility or sensitivity, I should say. And I just everything that it's one of those interesting things. Codes is a word that you use a lot, Lou, which I always kind of find quite interesting because it's
also a really terrible word.
It's one of those things when you think about V&A. Of course, there is a real code there.
Yeah.
And the difficulty is, and I guess with what Jonathan's doing at Loewe, is kind of understanding what's gone before and kind of balancing it with what will come or what should come. And my issue with V&A is that it kind of seems so divorced from everything that it was about, that it just ends up looking like it just looks completely irrelevant, not only to V&A but also for me to the just fashion in general right now. So that's the only thing that's really stuck out for me. Of course, Lemaire, your Drieses of the world, they're the labels that I look at all of the time because they don't surprise me in a nice way. But I thought that, and I quite like the departure that Olivier did at Balmain. I thought, although it wasn't to my taste, but I thought it was good to have him kind of move away from, the shoulder pads and the gold that we're so used to. So I thought that was quite interesting too.
And it's interesting, you used a word then, you said irrelevant when you were talking irrelevant. And I want to pick up on that to kick off our discussion of Com, because what's so interesting to me about Com, just endlessly fascinating, both from a fashion perspective but also from a business perspective, is how Com is so relevant and has stayed so relevant, and everything they touch seems to seem amazing and cool, even though it's an incredibly commercial brand. It's like $180 million a year turnover or something mental like that. Why is Com so brilliant? Lucy, I'm going to go to you now. Big question.
Okay.
Explain the genius of Ray Kawakubo.
Because Ray Kawakubo is fashion, like full stop. I'm just going to put that out there. She is fashion. She is almost kind of like, I don't know, some grand high sort of priestess that sort of just pops in every now and again and sort of stirs things up and like pops a little sort of zeitgeisty type sort of. She'll play around with the proportion, watch everybody else just sort of like devour it, whether it be other designers in the high street, and then she'll pop that back in her collection to remind everybody that she kind of did that. And then she actually comments on the system itself. So her designs will be commenting on how fast fashion is, so she'll do loads of sort of collaging and crazy, when she mashed up collections into one collection, this idea of crushing. And she actually comments on the state of fashion itself. So,
and the state of the world. Last
and the state of the world.
With the anti-war.
Absolutely, lumps and bumps, and she's a groundbreaking philosopher. But for me, Japanese designers, and she's at the fore of that, they have come into the world of Western fashion, and sort of because we're so kind of used to what we think is the norm. They came in, shook it all up, and then have enabled us to sort of see actually that there are loads of codes and uniforms and staples that we can play with. And I just think
so
that
they opened up fashion.
Yeah, she's opened it up. She literally tore it apart and has enabled us to sort of see how we can have fun with it.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'm going to go to you as well, Nick, because you kind of dropped this bombshell when you walked in, where you were like, oh, I met Rei Kawakubo, she was really great, and she like changed what I was thinking about. Or you said something like that. We've never talked about this the entire time I've worked at SHOWstudio.
Right.
Tell me about it. Tell me about
Tell you about the
her.
meeting with Rei Kawakubo?
Yeah.
I'm not sure it's that interesting, but I'll tell you about it as you've asked. I was in Japan in the late 80s, which was amazing.
Yeah.
I was there working with a friend of mine, Satoko Nakahara, who's a Japanese writer. We were working on a magazine at the time. And she was Rei Kawakubo's assistant, I believe, so I get this right. She was also then later Yohji Yamamoto's assistant.
Yeah.
And she took me down to meet Rei. And I met Rei quite normally. I mean, this is, I was only sort of in my mid-20s then. And I kind of accepted this is what fashion was about. And I met Rei, and she spoke fluent English. And it was all fine. She was very, very charming. She took me down to sort of the basement of her, wherever we met, and she gave me some gifts to take back for my wife, and it was all perfectly lovely. Weirdly, I met her again many years later.
Now you're just showing off.
Sorry?
Now you're just showing off.
She's
actually my best friend.
No, I wish she was. She's not. And then she didn't seem to be able to speak English anymore and had a translator, which is a bit weird because I'd sort of met her previously and she did. Yeah. But I think she's, like Lucy, I think she is fashion. She's super exciting.
Yeah.
And what I love about her, she's like, if you take an analogy like David Bowie, had Bowie for a long time, just reinvented herself and kept on surprising us, amazing with every album, with every manifestation, etc. Went a little bit odd for a while. But and Rei's one of those people who's also managed to do that. Yeah. Keeps showing his collections, which are exciting. So I find her, I've always found her a departure in fashion. When she came along, it was the same time for me that I met Yohji Yamamoto, started working with Yohji Yamamoto. And it was really, for me, I think it ushered in a new world. It was a new vision. It was totally different to anything that had gone before. It pulled references from Walt Disney and from the apocalypse and from post-war Japan and from everything, and mixed them all up and threw them out. Sometimes they were very sort of sugar-coated, and other times they were really harsh. And I loved it. It was a whole new language in fashion that had never been seen before. And that combined with Yohji Yamamoto, who wasn't quite as colourful in some ways, because Yohji's colour code was basically very, very dark blue, black, and that's about it. But Rei's was much more vibrant and sort of much more colourful. I think the only regret I have is and I could be wrong with this, although she's worked with some amazing photographers and image makers, I don't think she's ever really found somebody to express her fashion on the same level that she can in terms of the image. Yeah. I mean, she came along at a time where fashion photography was into sort of sort of naturalistic, sort of Bruce Weber, Peter Lindbergh. Yeah. And although they photographed her clothes beautifully, I didn't feel they spoke the same language that she spoke. And I always thought it was a shame that she never found an image maker that spoke her language and could propose visions of her clothes in the same way that she could create the clothes. And I don't think she ever has, so I think she's often turned to artists to do that. Yeah. But never to fashion photography, which I always think was a shame.
Yeah, that does.
Yeah, that is interesting, because we were just talking earlier that when I trained as a fashion designer, going to Japan for the first time in the mid-80s and seeing the clothes actually there in the store and seeing the sort of feel of them, that she had these models that were hanging and sort of swaying in the breeze. And as you said, that idea of her being able to bring multiple ideas into her designs, I was trained to be able to sort of look at a particular era or particular location and in a very linear way through college to think about creating a collection. And for me, what stood out about her work was the fact that she is coming from lots of different directions all at once. So she's looking at politics, she's looking at life, she's looking at what it is to be a woman. And she's also very honest about the fact that fashion is pretty much, it's about a commercial transaction. And I know she said that I make business with creation. And I think that also is a kind of a different point of view, because there's, 20 odd million women around the world making fashion as part of business, but they don't actually get the opportunity to have a creativity put into it, and they don't do it under their own terms and their own rules. and she's kind of found a way to have her own rules, and she sort of sits within a commercial context, but definitely under her own terms.
Yeah, no, definitely.
And in that way, with all of those different influences and all those layers, it's very much kind of how we're living life right now. You know, the idea with, you know, post-internet life, with all of those references that we have at our fingertips, kind of shoving them all together and seeing what comes out. You know, she's been doing that for a long time. So now more than ever, really, her vision and her creations, even in a very basic way, they're very Tumblr friendly. Because they just look incredible as photographs, which again picks up on what you're saying, Nick, about, you know, having a photographer kind of realise them in more than just a very two-dimensional way. So in lots of different ways, she's kind of so now, but she's been now forever, if that makes sense.
It's really interesting because, you know, her approach was fundamentally, I guess, postmodern and punk, which is an assimilation of Dadaism, which is kind of this cut up and stick, destroy the system, recollage, blah, blah, blah. But that is happening, like Dal said, on the internet now. So it's kind of like this sort of, you know, this kind of, you know, whether you're doing it on Instagram or whatever, but it's this collecting of images and mashing together all of these things. It's actually just like the cut and stick lo-fi thing that they were doing 30 years ago, the zine kind of thing, but it's like this digital kind of Tumblr culture that we're kind of living in, which is a simulation of what she was doing. And so it's interesting that we're doing this kind of mashup thing again.
It's interesting, this discussion, because one of the things that often comes through on this panel is a kind of concern for that mashup culture and how it means that, you know, like there's not proper knowledge of where things come from, and, you know, that people don't have a real sense of identity or sort of a tribe when it comes to fashion anymore because everything is too out there. But it's interesting also to look at the positive effects of that, and this idea of kind of being able to try things. And you said that approach was really formative to you. Just working as a creative, do you find that idea of being able to kind of freely take things and discard them and is quite important?
Yeah, I think it's very important. I think there's a whole new language coming out of the internet, a whole new visual language coming out of the internet, which hasn't found its parameters at all yet. So loads of things are being tried out. So really, I mean, for image making, it's such an exciting time. And I think she was ahead of all of that. I think she ushered that in, that aesthetic. I mean, God knows how, back in the early 80s she first really started, how that sort of came. And you mentioned, one of you mentioned punk, Lucy, you mentioned punk.
And it was like a series of really intelligent points. It came back to me, it was like the pressure to ask a good question after you'd all just said something really profound. It was really hard.
But she throw it back to Nick.
She had a sort of aesthetic when she first started, very sort of, when I did the punk show at the Met, the last room was about sort of Yoji and Com in a way, sort of nihilistic, no future type vibe. And it was that very nihilistic approach, the sort of, you know, the sort of almost after the bomb had gone off Japan, you know, so everything was tattered and torn, and didn't go down very well, I think, when it was shown in Paris. It upset the sort of French establishment at the time. It was a really brave thing to do. I mean, it was 10 years after punk, roughly, not quite, but 83 or 84. But it's still, you know, the first designers to really reflect that in a very intellectual way.
But in terms of digital culture and technology, you know, Japan kind of adopted that way before everyone else.
That's a really good point.
There are now negative kind of connotation of kind of things that are happening there for that reason. You know, people getting married to digital women, you know, no one having children, no one having sex, no one having children.
Anti-feminist thing. I mean, I'm very careful not to just rule out these new ways of living. So if you want to marry a digital, fine, go ahead. I don't necessarily see that as a negative. I see that as a human creativity.
But the negative, I guess, effect on that is that the population is kind of dying.
Because literally, there was a really good.
They're really old, and no one's new coming up.
Literally, no one has sex in Japan. There's that big Guardian piece.
Oh, you can't say that, Lou.
No, genuinely. I will show you the article.
Kind of social phenomenon.
That just young people just don't have sex.
They're going home and they're just logging on.
I'm not saying that none of them do, but there's lots of studies that have been done, like just surveys of young people.
You can't stop people having sex.
No, I'm not saying.
I mean, you can't take that urge away from us. That's how we.
Whenever the urge is being satisfied by an app or some sort of virtual reality.
Kind of like,
but surely the fact that you can program something. I mean, and I'm not anti.
This conversation's going to go so really interesting.
The idea of being able to have incredible relationships that are digital and use your imagination is also great ways. But if you're talking about, maybe it's the word marriage, there's something then that I wonder whether you start to change what you feel about relationships in the physical form. So, because if you're starting to equate something that you've got power over, that you can kind of prescribe and idealize, and is not a notion of, because humanity is about the things that go right and wrong, and not something you can prescribe.
Well, a film isn't the film She, isn't that? Her. I won't ruin the ending for you.
But I think that coming back to Ray, I think that
you're like just getting away from that.
just coming back to Ray, I think the whole point of why she was like rag picking, so to speak, and like just taking references from everywhere and just destroying it, I do think it came from a dark place. I think now kids are taking references, and yes, I don't think necessarily people, I've ranted about this on other panels, I don't think necessarily people are necessarily thinking about what they are pulling from different places, but I do think that she did, and I think the whole point of it was that she was, in a way, destroying fashion like Dada, the Dadaists destroyed art to start again. That collection that Nick spoke about, it got panned, and it got nicknamed Hiroshima Chic, and she was really upset, and so was Yoji, and it was a time when they felt massively misunderstood. Can you imagine? It was all black, and it was all that kind of sort of burnt and ripped, but without her, would we have grunge?
No, definitely, It's interesting to think about that, because I often ask this on the panels, and I wonder if it would be possible to do something that new again, and I always like to think that of course it would be, but then it's really hard to imagine being able. I do think people are just so much more unshockable now, and I can't imagine anyone having that same kind of effect of.
Well, I think we're shocked more by purity rather than anything else now. So now when someone is completely plain looking, that actually calls for quite a lot of attention, for example. There's a whole wave of kind of new labels that are doing that very sort of what seems like quite plain clothing, but actually there's a lot more going on. So I think we just have to shock in a different way now. And I think that's the bit that we're all still learning.
Could there be like a watershed fashion moment?
And I think also, purity and puritanical, there is also a sense with her that actually she's quite puritanical with her work, and has got a real commitment. So whatever she's doing is done with real precision. Absolutely. And I think there's a difference between the mashup that is things that are thrown together in a way that maybe isn't with a sort of underlying philosophy that is actually almost quite puritanical, thinking about this commitment to style, this commitment to the creation of a moulding of a material in a particular way. And I think that's a very different starting point. So the philosophy behind the mashup is a very different philosophy from a lot of the philosophy that's about just pulling from places randomly.
It reminds me a little bit of when I worked with John Galliano. When he first went to the house of Dior, he had quite a clever way of approaching Dior. He wanted to re-establish the brand, first of all, as a brand of ultimate elegance. So his first 2 or 3 collections were super, super refined and elegant, with all the old values. And then he said to me, what I want to do is like you pull the carpet from under, bouleverser was his word, to pull the carpet from under, so everything flies up in the air and all the values get mixed up. And then John, very similar to Ray, pulls references from all over the place, or used to pull references from all over the place. So he'd mix up Mexican culture with Japanese manga, all these different things come together. So it's a similar way of working.
Very similar, it's a postmodern thing. And it's so interesting that you said bouleversé, because that's actually a reference that she gave one of her recent collections, where she tipped everything upside down. See, so it's this kind of idea that, like she had the David Byrne reference in her last collection, nothing makes sense. It's all from that 70s, 80s era, which I do think, Lou, will never be repeated again for a long time. I don't want to sound like there's not room for this to happen again, but that 70s and 80s period of everything just getting tipped upside down, and
it's quite a well-known creative tool is to let go of control. So it's like the cut-ups, and it's just the element of chance. Absolutely. So you take something that's formed and you let it unform, and then you see what new things are happening in the chaos that's created by that. It is how I try and work, actually,
And do you think you learnt that from, not learnt that, that's a weird way of putting it.
No, I don't think I appropriated or learnt it from anybody we've talked about. You learn it because that's what gives you the most pleasure. You learn it because that feels most exciting. But when you think you understand everything, it's quite boring. So to actually be presented with a problem or the fear of, or whatever it is, all those things, the lack of control is what's exciting.
Also, I just think fashion has changed so much that those sorts of people that are even being born now that would have traditionally challenged fashion in that way are probably looking at fashion as it is now thinking, oh, I don't want to do that, I'm going to go do something else. So maybe we're going to see a whole host of digital interactive designers or visual artists.
People in tech that are being really disruptive in a way that fashion.
I mean, if I was 14 or 12, however, I mean, from zero when I wanted to be, all I knew was fashion, I definitely wouldn't want to do the fashion that we're in now. If I was that 12-year-old looking at it now, I'd just think, well, this doesn't really speak to me. And so we've got to kind of consider that, again, our future, those people who traditionally would have ended up maybe in a business like fashion are probably going to go somewhere else now, and that's really exciting, because maybe that area, that industry doesn't even exist yet.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But that sense you were talking about kind of throwing things up, I think, I wonder whether a lot of fashion designers at the moment really understand the sort of sense of jeopardy. And I think that maybe, again, this is where Ray's a bit different, that she doesn't worry too much about kind of conforming to the system. And I think a lot of our designers are kind of, and especially the guys that they start their own businesses up and then they go to the big houses and then they feel as though they have to kind of conform.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they don't kind of just think, actually, there's a wider jeopardy in the world, and, you know, if I'm thinking about my own work and what we're doing, you know, we know absolutely that our children, our grandchildren are not going to inherit the world that we've got. And yet we're not creatively responding to that through fashion very much.
No.
And that's where it's interesting to see work like that. And you're saying that we're not going to get to a sense that we did in the 70s and 80s where we were really trying to throw things up. Now is the time we really should be throwing things up. You know? We can't keep emitting into the atmosphere. We've got less than a generation's worth of CO2 emissions before we literally kind of go into the escalation of emissions that will change climate beyond anything that we can even think about. So we should really be seeing that through fashion and culture, and it's surprising that we're not.
But you'd be surprised when I speak to young fashion students, and I did a series of talks and workshops at the postmodernist exhibition at the V&A. So I was really, I was just thinking nothing but postmodernism for about a year. Everything was postmodern. My sister, the running joke in my family, is like, no, everything can't be postmodern. I'm like, that's so postmodern. But it was. And then I would speak to students and I would try and get them on to this new, I'd be like, there's not going to be jobs, you're coming to university and this is what's going to be waiting for you out there. I was trying to get them to be angry and mobilised, and they were just like, I was like, how do you feel about that? And they were like, it'll be all right. And I'm like, oh. So actually there is this incredible optimism within the youth that they, and I do think...
But I wonder if it's apathy or optimism.
I don't know, but they genuinely just do think it's going to be okay, I think.
Yeah. But do you think they have... I don't know if it's optimism, and I don't know if they feel positive about their life as much as just kind of numb.
No, I think they genuinely just, I don't know, haven't really maybe awakened to this message. I don't know. Yeah,
it's that weird kind of... Because I feel like that numbness kind of comes across in fashion sometimes. It's like everyone's kind of pretending everything's fine and going along with it and everything.
Well, we're all sort of desensitized, aren't we?
Yeah,
aesthetically we're desensitized. And because they're like looking on Tumblr and you see hardcore pornographic imagery next to a really beautiful cat, next to a gorgeous smiling corgi, next to a Galliano 2001 spring summer Dior.
I really thought you were saying really beautiful dress and then you said cat.
But all of that is so you don't differentiate between those things because they're all just sort of there, which is, again, let's be positive, incredibly interesting and exciting. But it's down to those of us that teach or educate to kind of just ram it home and to hope that someone actually picks up on this and does put it in some sort of cultural washing machine, because that's what needs to happen. But
and I think it is starting to happen, because I think people are starting to question this accessibility to everything and actually wanting to find a refinement and wanting to find something that is giving them a path through things. Or also we need to teach the skills of being able to deal with the sort of ambiguities and the fact that things are a mess, and actually finding your own place within that instead of just deciding to be part of the status quo.
That's interesting. I want to just change tack kind of completely here and talk a little bit about Dover Street, because we've never actually talked about Dover Street when we've done a comm panel, and I think it's interesting what we're saying about Ray Kawakubo as a designer, but also
I'd like to talk about Victoria Beckham.
Do you want to talk about Rebecca?
And her new store on Dover Street.
Yeah,
I just imagine. Well, because thanks to Dover Street Market, there was a Victoria Beckham store opposite. So the legacy or
the sweet irony.
You might expect the conversation to go that way.
I was like, okay.
That's
gone straight from
There's Marquet around the corner as well, though. So it's
there is. No, I mean, but it's that whole.
Highbrow.
But that's how Ray or Comme as a brand before everyone else. Everyone remembers that street as just kind of these wonderful but kind of relatively kind of small fine art galleries, and now look, everyone wants a piece of it, including Mrs. Beckham. So I think it's kind of that. Sorry, that was my interjection.
No, that was an important interjection. But I think it's interesting because one thing I wanted to ask is about firstly about what she's done for retail in terms of the model of Dover Street. So it's interesting you talk about the kind of people that are flocking there. But do you think it's so important to have this kind of, because people do go there and they just think it's so weird. Like you see it when you go in there on a weekend and there's tourists and they're just like looking at it like a museum. But I think that's really important to still have retail spaces that are kind of, you feel like you're in a world. You're not just kind of going there and being sold stuff.
Wasn't it modelled on Hyper or Kensington Market?
Oh, was
Yeah,
it?
Yes,
it was modelled on Kensington Market. I remember her saying something.
Hyper.
Oh, was it Hyper?
She loved that as well. Yeah, so I don't really. Yeah, she was very inspired by that. I think.
Hyper, for people who don't know, didn't go there in Kensington Market, were on High Street Kensington. They were fairly cheap. They're big buildings full of lots of different stores, like little market stores, but all in a building. Both Hyper was slightly more fashion than Kensington Market. Kensington Market was a bit more goth. So that's what they were. But that was, I think that was the original model for Dover Street Market, which is kind of weird because the one thing it isn't is cheap.
Well, I don't know. I think there is a notion you can go there and you can always buy something, even if it is like. No, you don't look at me like that. You can go and even.
Well,
if
that's
it's like,
why it's exit through the gift shop, isn't it?
Yeah,
you go
it
and
is
there's like a T-shirt, there's a play
T-shirt.
thing. It is.
Even if you just buy a scone from the, you just literally like, we're paying too much.
I think my son went there a couple of days ago. What's it? I had to get my references straight. But it's like they had an orange juice, which was like £8 or something.
Yeah, it is. But they have things like labour and weight.
But
and
it's an
little
experience,
things.
Nick. Your son had an experience.
Yeah, he didn't like the orange juice.
He had a retail experience.
Well, going back to Hyper and that whole idea of the experience, what was amazing about Hyper was the guys in there were the guys that were making the clothes. They were the designers themselves.
Yes,
you had
right.
Pam
Hogg,
Hogg, and you walked into a whole community, a kind of outlook on life, a culture that was so much a part of what London is about. And I mean, I love Dover Street, but I don't know that has been recreated.
No, that's what I'm saying. It's a sort of funny thing. I know it is. Well, I feel I know that is her reference for Dover Street, but Dover Street's never really felt that. I do think Dover Street's great. It was for a very long time. It was very empty. You go there and there was nobody in there. But I haven't been there so much recently, but it seems to have picked up a little bit. Am I right?
It's very busy when you go there. It feels more kind of sanitised than it once did, I think.
Well, also, I think for a year or so, it didn't have a sign on it, so it was brilliant because you really did feel like, I'm going to find it. I'm going to this what looks like a really kind of horrible office block, and there's this incredible shop inside. But very quickly they realised that you're cutting out a whole group of people that want to know where you are, and then there you go, and then it's kind of that's where the street and the shop has kind of become.
But it was really exciting. I remember going in there in the early days. They asked SHOWstudio to be part of it, actually. One of the proposals that SHOWstudio actually had its studio in there. It was very exciting, and the decor and the different designers they got and the different architects they got in to represent those designers. I thought it was really thrilling. I mean, as a retail place, it was really thrilling.
They have done some amazing installations. The Ita Street one they did was incredible. Which was really cool.
No, it was.
That was really, really
and there's something about the stairs as well that I think is quite incredible because you're in one room and then you go out to that and then you kind of feel as though you're in a completely personalityless office block, and then you're going up these sort of back stairs and then you come into something, and so the contrast between a very ordinary set of stairs and then this incredible room that you almost feel as if you're discovering it every time.
Well, it's hard, and that's what's quite nice is that those people that are in there, they are genuinely, that word experience and concept store is rendered almost meaningless, but those people that aren't really sure of what's going on or used to that way of being sold something really do leave with a different mindset. They might realise and think that it's the most pretentious, hideous thing in the world, which it kind of is. But a lot of people seem to enjoy that.
Impact. If you think of the way that every other retailer now is trying to kind of do that, these weird installations, these cool things. It's interesting. Just talk about a shop that's amazing, which I'm obsessed with, and no one knows about. So we're going to talk about on palette. Is Egg. which has a similar thing. If you go into Egg, there's people making this stuff there in the studios next to it. Apparently that's Ray Kawakubo's like favourite label as well, so everyone go to Egg, which is down the road from SHOWstudio, so come and see us as well, which is fabulous.
I don't know how Egg would feel about all these people coming in there though.
No, I think they'd like it. They're really nice if you go in there. I was trying on a hat on my way in. It was fabulous. It had a little pom-pom.
Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt the story about hats and pom-poms.
No, that was it. That was done.
I was going to make the point. It was a very different feel to how the Japanese used to retail in London.
Yeah.
Before Dover Street, I think Ray had a shop on Brook Street, just opposite Claridge's.
But wasn't that one of the pop-ups?
I don't think so. No,
it was on the corner for a really long time, and it was very posh. And very kind of you very quiet, and you sort of rang the bell and you went in. And
it was very lovely. And Yoji used to have shops on Sloane Street. First time I worked with him, he was on Sloane Street. And he was across the other side. But the atmosphere in those shops, they were like temples. I mean, you go in and it was super quiet and calm. You had to have a certain amount of courage to put on a thing whether you didn't know where the sleeves were and how many sleeves you're supposed to have and all that sort of, and walk the length of the whole shop to the mirror. That was quite a sort of, if you could do that walk, then you could probably wear the clothes. That was a very different experience to Dover Street Market.
And I think that's the thing when you made the point earlier on about this mashup or tearing or whatever. These houses are very spiritual houses, and this Japanese philosophy that they have. The amazing exhibition that they had at the Barbican a few years ago, Future Beauty, and they curated it beautifully, and they had like lights and shadows and talking about in terms of kind of her values and the values of Yoji, etc. And like everything, like those shops and what she's doing, it might feel very kind of like rebellious, but it actually comes from a really beautiful, peaceful place. Like they believe the colour black is actually like, is love and is beauty, not white. And they
same as in Japanese cemeteries.
Absolutely.
So white is the colour of death.
And they believe she has always tries to have like distance between the body and the cloth, and there's this kind of ancient sort of spiritual void which is called Ma, which is why she tries to always keep the body away. And then wabi sabi as well, the beauty and the imperfect. So it might all feel like she's got the wallets and the retail and everything, but there's a real sort of there's a real purity, which I think somebody mentioned earlier on.
Which is interesting, because I asked this on a panel earlier in the season and no one seemed to agree, but I think, I actually asked if fashion felt less political, but you could also ask if fashion feels less kind of spiritual in some ways. And I feel like that really has gone from fashion. There's not this sense of kind of loving your things or thinking of them as having meaning or even thinking of them as saying anything. I certainly think that about fashion, but am I being too pessimistic there?
I mean, I think I look for meaning in anything I can find because that's my position, that's my raison d'etre, but sadly not a lot. The thing is, fashion's turned into shopping, and lots of people that think they're into fashion are actually just into shopping. And actually, there are clothes out there that have meaning. And I don't know whether, like we said, designers are now playing to a different, like when we spoke about J.W. Anderson at Loewe, and like what constitutes being a good designer? Is it now about being a brand, as opposed to actually making clothes that mean something? And I think that we live in times of incredibly consumerist times, and hopefully the message will win out, but we'll have to see what happens.
But anything we wear is saying something about who we are. So I think that fashion still it's very political because it's
I agree, but I wonder if there's that consciousness.
But I was going to say that maybe we're kind of distracted by consumerism and not actually stopping to think about what we're wearing, what it's saying about us. And what we're saying to other people.
When I launched like Pretoreve, that was the whole position that I adopted. It was an e-commerce site that was supposed to have meaning, which is an oxymoron in itself, because it was consumerism positioned against theory, and the strapline was wake up, start dreaming, shop. So it's the idea that you can't actually really buy something until you really know what it means and hopefully give heart to it.
But also I think the hierarchy of information has dissolved. So, for example, when fashion has ever been discussed in history, or it's always been discussed as a very sort of high, well-respected art form, for example, so it's only in particular, you only ever really saw it discussed in a certain way, but now we're seeing all ways of discussing every single subject. So we're getting a lot of what could I guess traditionally be called the low culture, or the sort of populist version of fashion. We're just seeing that everywhere now. So actually it just means that, you know, all of those things that we love fashion for, they do still exist, but they are just difficult to actually find. Because those clear channels, and now we're just kind of, there's the cute cats and the pornography to kind of wade through. And I think, because the internet has given everyone a voice, and you're just going to see more people talking, if you follow the hashtag of fashion online, you're going to see more people that just want to dress, the meaning that they put in that dress is to look sexier. And that's fine, because I mean, come on, for a lot of people that is the point. It should be the point for a lot of us. You know, not everyone needs to spend as much time as we all might thinking about clothes, because then I worry that we'd all be, you know, we wouldn't really achieve anything. What would we be doing? You know, life's got to go on at some point.
I don't know that it's about the amount of time you spend thinking about what you're wearing, but I think that anything that you do pick up is something that you're saying about yourself. But I think that whole idea of it's existing, fashion with meaning is existing, but we don't necessarily see it, because a lot of the fashion media, which is why SHOWstudio is obviously so important, and Gentlewoman, because most of the fashion media is owned and has got the stranglehold of the advertisers. So it is just about the commercial transaction. So I think this idea of fashion being hijacked by consumerism is because of the models that are in the media. To be able to,
I don't think it's just the internet. I think that's a good point.
And the models for business as well. But there is a lot of fashion out there that isn't just about what's on the high street. And there's a lot of fashion out there that has got actually no commercial transaction in it, because there's clothes that people change over time that they wear, they swap with their friends. There's a whole kind of black economy or whatever of what goes on in fashion that's about people making meaning that isn't about what's on Oxford Street.
I think Ray's position was that to be sexy was to be covered. This is her position still, this idea that it goes back to the kimono and kind of Japanese culture of like, what you don't see is hotter than what you do see, and this idea of like being covered and then having room within the body, like she said, just there's nothing more erotic than knowing that there's a woman's body moving around in there, but you can't see it, kind of thing, which is kind of, so I don't know whether that is right for the now. I mean, there's a lot of feminism floating around, but like with the girly film, it's gone really super girly now, hasn't it? It's turned into that old kind of sort of early, another form of feminism that's been around in the late 20th century, which is just being super girly and playing with that in an ironic way, like I'm girly, but actually I have a right to be girly, but I'm actually very feminist and I'll screw you over type thing.
Watch our girl film on SHOWstudio.
I
want to pick up, I want to just ask you about this, Nick. I'm conscious I want to look at the clothes, but there's so much to talk about. Do you think that, because we've done so many projects on SHOWstudio, and you, before I joined, have done so many amazing things on SHOWstudio about fashion as a political thing, or something that's important, and said stuff, but do you think that you're seeing that in, I don't know, whether it's design work or photography? Do you worry that people aren't thinking about what they're saying, they're just thinking about trying to sell stuff?
I always worry about making big sweeping generalizations of what people do, because I never met people, I only meet individuals. So I don't have a big sort of blanket worry about these things. Like I don't have a sort of blanket worry about where humanity is going. It'll find its own way. I'm not sure if the question is, do I think fashion is political? Yes, absolutely. I think it's an incredibly important way of us expressing who we are as people. Some people are more knowing how they do that, other people are less. I came to it through the 70s and being a skinhead, that you couldn't get a more overt way of dressing politically, which you really wore your political allegiances on your front. And I played for that at the time. So I come to it through that. Then through image making, I look at clothes and I find there's narrative in the clothes, and I find that they're speaking to me in the way that they inform me how I should create the image of them. So I think lots of clothes I photograph and make images of are all imbued with this sort of narrative, and often it is very political. I think the interesting thing, slightly moving away from there, is how Ray sees sexuality. I'm very interested in what you say, Lucy, because I hadn't really heard that before about her. And I've always, when Yoji and Ray first came into my life, was sort of 85, 86, and it was a time when all the fashion designers at the time really proposed just a sexual vision of women, and they were the first designers, to my mind, that proposed a vision of women which was not sexually based. So you didn't have to show off your curves, or it was not about that.
Yeah.
Which I thought was a very strong feminist statement at the time.
Yeah.
And it proposed an intellectual view of women and a view of women as powerful, which I thought was great.
Yeah.
So I've never thought of her as imagining what would be sexy when she does her clothes. I'm sure she must.
Yeah.
But I've never,
I wouldn't call it sexy, but there's
me.
maybe an eroticism to it, you know.
Yes.
And I think that, you know, when she did the Lumps and Bumps collection in 1997,
Yeah.
she literally, you know, that was the point she was making there, you know, how ludicrous is it that women are forced into this shape here and forced into this shape here for a Western notion of what beauty is. So I'm going to have the bump here and the bump here and the bump here, just to sort of get us to kind of reconfigure, how ludicrous our shape is in terms of the way that we force and contort it, and how it could be, and actually, you know, I guess just again, sort of this idea of cutting up and starting again. She literally cut the body up and was just like, look, I'm going to reconfigure it. So I think that, again, there's lots of ancient Japanese sort of philosophies that are quite alien to us in terms of being covered, but she's really shook up Western notions of sexuality, and and just represented. I think that's the great position as well, is that it is I don't know. She's not saying necessarily that she has the answers.
Yeah, I never feel like she's a dictatorial designer, which is really interesting, because I think she has a very strong vision, but it never feels like she's saying this is the way, or you must do this, which I think is, to me, that's what feels really unique, because I think now that's what every brand is trying to do, which is, I think, fueled by fashion journalists being like, we just want to see a strong point of view, you know, or we want to have someone with a strong aesthetic, but it just becomes like, kind of, you must wear this to be on trend. You must
exactly.
wear
this. When she did that crazy collection which Gaga wore, the 2D,
the flat one,
the flat one, it was like no music, no lights, you know, everything was stripped back, and you go in there and you almost feel, and I know it's the biggest cliche when you talk about Ray going to the laboratory, but it really does feel like you're going into something that she's working through herself.
Well, that's what process. You feel like you're invited into an idea rather than you're being told something.
Yeah, and that is why when we were talking about J.W. Anderson at Loewe the other day, when he reveals the process and that gives him cachet, it originally came from people like her.
Like her, exactly.
Because she's the real process-driven person, and everybody else is trying to look process-driven. Yeah. But she's really working the major big meta-narratives of fashion out, you know.
Yeah, and you're kind of invited to
have a look.
Yeah, and think about them as well.
Yeah.
And that's where it goes back to the idea of the purity of the craft, because she's playing with pattern cutting and playing with the materials in a way that she's moulding them according to her emotions. And it's interesting, so I work with master students, and there's a master student I'm working with at the moment that is looking at different emotions and how they can be translated through different shapes on the body. And I think that she was the first person to really do that, to be able to think about, actually, you're expressing, and going back to the Bumps and Lumps collection, you're expressing notions of heaviness and thinking about different elements of the body in a very, very different way. I mean, the student that I've got at the moment is literally taking data that's to do with emotions and how people feel, and then using that data to create and cut patterns. So people who are worried about a particular thing or who have a concern, she's creating shapes that are in response to that. So this notion of using a craft of pattern cutting to express emotions, I think, is a really interesting way of looking at things. And I do think that there are, whether it's fashion students or people that are even themselves thinking about the way that they dress, I think that there is a lot of really exciting stuff going on. It's just that it's not very well told a lot of the time. And
it's interesting, going back to what you were saying, Dad, about people entering the industry. I often feel like some of the most exciting things come when fashion people work collaboratively. So someone we work a lot with here is Iris van Herpen, and I feel like a lot of her really exciting stuff that she does comes from the fact that she's so collaborative and she works with people who are working in the fields of technology. So it's almost like she's kind of looked around the fashion industry and not dismissed it, I don't think that at all, but she's looked around and gone, okay, to push myself, I need to push myself out of here, and she's like, so I'm going to work with this architect.
But I think the pressure is that we're also greedy as well, and people like Iris van Herpen, who they're not thousands of people like her. You know, they're not millions of people with that creativity, that brain, that talent. There aren't as many as maybe as journalists, as writers, the hunger that we have for them. We want like loads of people that are as amazing as she is, or we want 2,500 Gallianos But those guys, they
don't
are
want
just
that. I
the
just
one
want to get rid of all the mediocre people and just focus on the
But I
good
think that for me, definitely, I feel that, I'm always kind of like, oh my God, for example, with Iris, it's kind of like everyone, when anyone ever talks about digital technology and fashion, they just, get her. Yeah. But actually, they've been doing that for a while, and yes, she's incredible, but it always makes me just go, actually, why aren't there no other ones? And actually, that's a really interesting thing, is that maybe, she is, of course, at the forefront.
But isn't it
of what
sad
she's
also
doing.
that she just becomes that? People are like, oh yeah, the digital fashion 3D girl, and then like that's separate from all the
people
rest.
Like quick solutions and
they like a label,
I think one thing with Ray Coco and with Yoji is that they brought forward a different culture into fashion.
Yeah, that's
different geographical culture. Before we are still so dominated by a Western view of fashion.
Yeah.
Now we're starting to see, and because of the internet, seeing people like Gosha Rubinsky coming from Russia,
who they supported, which is
they supported. So you're actually getting a very different cultural vision of women, of people, of dressing, and that was what was so strong when they first started and came across it. It was a very, very different cultural vision which hadn't previously been in fashion. Yeah. And now, I'm hoping to see, great Chinese fashion, great Indian fashion, great Russian fashion, great South American, great Canadian, etc., etc., etc. Yeah. Because we're much more of the world is much more in contact with itself now. Yeah. So, but I think they did bring all that. So the things we're talking about, the sexuality and how Lucy was saying, the different Japanese, which you might understand much more if you were Japanese, but immersing or putting that in our sort of very westernized view of fashion, I think was really strong.
Really strong. And I think this is going to make me sound like an idiot, but there's actually a really good piece on BuzzFeed, don't laugh at me, about the cliches of fashion journalism. And someone's obviously got really pissed off with reading articles that kind of like make trends out of things that have been around in different cultures for ages and ages, and as soon as they enter the fashion system they kind of become like this cool new thing that someone's come up with. And I find that really interesting as well, and it makes me sometimes worry about reporting, because I think it's really true what you say, but then I feel like sometimes now if someone comes along and they bring something from their Russian heritage, for example, into fashion, people, the fashion sort of media are so ingrained with a Western perspective on fashion. I feel like sometimes they write about it in a way which just doesn't get that complexity.
But I guess we're living in it now, and I guess what Nick is saying, that the philosophy, as we heard, when they first showed in Paris, people were really not into it. So it took a long time.
I just think people don't understand it.
And it isn't a visual thing, it's more about just their philosophy on women, on the body, on clothing, and hopefully, in 15 years' time, we'll then recognise the influence that maybe, Dutch fashion designers have had, or Russian, or African, or whatever.
I just think Western media has this kind of tendency to see it as a challenge to Western, and I'm like, well, they're not being like, this is my culture to challenge it. It's just, of course, that informs the way they design. I don't know if I'm putting that very astutely, but
but it's like semiotics, locally kind of looking at semiotic rather than just this kind of tourist notion of what people should be doing. Chinoiserie, I spoke about this on the RAF panel, is actually just a Western term. If you talk to a young teenage kid in Beijing, he's not going to know what chinoiserie means. Yeah. It's a Western notion of what Orientalism looks like.
Exactly.
And so it's like a postcard of almost their culture. Yeah. And it's really interesting, when looking at the RAF collection I was on the panel for, he has done a kind of like billboard almost on the back of his jackets of images that he's collected. Like they're almost like, it is like an Instagram collage, but they're all ancient Japanese like woodcuts and stuff. So it's still this kind of Japanese, and he is almost, I guess, riffing off that again. That sort of we're not yet globally meshed in a true postmodern world. We still have got this modernist thing of, we look like, we do this, you have this, and actually we've got so far to go, and it's very exciting times.
It's very exciting. That's some optimism which I like to see.
and picking up on that notion of the sort of commitment to your own philosophy from different cultures, I think that also is changing now as we've got fashion schools around the world. And so people are feeling more confident in being able to bring their own aesthetic and their own culture without having to almost present it to the Western version and think, I've got to hold this up to a mirror and find out where it fits in. It's kind of, you don't have to worry about where it fits in. And also there are markets around the world now that are growing probably far more than European markets. So I think that's a really interesting way of us thinking over the next few years of the diversity of fashion in a very different way.
But would we like to see that it wouldn't have to be that, if there ever will be one, which I'm sure there won't be, but present a cliche, if the next Rei Kawakubo, we don't want her to have to come to Paris, do we? Would we rather have got rid of, by that point, have got rid of these stupid kind of 4 cities thing and just have fashion shown in China or in India or in Brazil or in South Africa? You know, it still seems like we're expecting people to take people seriously, maybe because there's so much, they have to come and be on a schedule in a major city.
But I think that kind of like, I mean, I've consulted on this quite a lot over the years because there's brands trying to figure out how to speak in a local language globally. And I think that a really good case study for how it has been done is Hermes. They've gone and launched a Chinese brand quite quietly in China that hasn't got Hermes branding on it anywhere. It's called Shangxia, and it's rooted in ancient Japanese philosophy but very, very modern. And young people are starting to sort of actually buy it as if it's a locally grown brand.
Yeah.
And because they've twigged onto the fact that in 10 years, 20 years time, you know, the Chinese millionaires aren't going to want LVMH.
Well, you've already seen that, you know, Prada with their have just talked about that this week, that they've had a real kind of slowdown, and they did a profit thing where they've slowed down their sales and no
this
one's buying it in China.
This has been coming for a long time though, and I've been preparing brands for this reality that you can't just think that they will keep coming. That Beijing Fashion Week, you know, there's an argument for it being that it will be as big as Paris in the future, and it will be locally grown talent doing
it. Well, it's already that's what I think is so interesting, is this notion that, you know, like the Chinese shop was going to continue to just want Prada and want this. And
no, they're not, because they want their own. You want your own culture reflected back at you. And do you want would you want to keep buying, you know, we love the fact that there's British fashion. Would you want to keep buying American or French? I don't know. And that's even in a Western thing.
And again, that happened in Japan from the 80s, because there was a time in Japan where you could go and buy beautiful Scottish knitwear that you couldn't even buy in Scotland. And there are a lot of British designers out there kind of riding high. And then you start to see a real change and seeing Japanese designers in Tokyo and the stores in Tokyo really changing. And maybe that's what's starting to happen in China as well now. So yeah, very interesting. But going back to what you said, Nick, about the sort of the optimism about humanity, I completely agree, because I think that what we haven't got in short supply is kind of our own ability to sort of be ingenious. But I do wonder then whether we need to think about in fashion to see the ingenuity that's outside of the catwalks, the capitals, and I think that's when we'll start to see things really change.
This is the best discussion ever. I want to keep going, but I do think we should look at the Comme des Garcons.
Yes, I know.
It's the best collection ever.
I know, exactly.
They build up.
I know. I love the hair. It's so fabulous.
It's fab. That colour red is just incredible.
It's incredible. But I love that it's lots of reds as well. And it's
that's why, it looks like
incredible.
Because it's lots of different shades.
It's a bit kind of almost aquatic, you know, all that shell,
coral,
that coral, and you know, in the way that.
And I like that the clothes just have so much. You can't really even call them clothes, but they have so much life. Do you know what I mean? That there's this sense of it kind of being.
Oh, they're theatrical, aren't they?
Yeah, but I don't think they're theatrical in a kind of intended way. It just feels like there's so much thought and passion in there that they almost feel to be. What's it like photographing, Comme?
Fantastic, a dream. Yeah. I'm looking at this and thinking, what joy.
Yeah.
For an image maker, this is just pure joy.
Yeah.
It just will photograph itself.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so creative, and there's so much in there. You know, if you ever get Comme des Garcons in front of your camera, it's just a real moment of bliss.
Yeah. And it's interesting also because we've talked so much about all of her ideas, but do you find with photographing pieces that you can almost pull many ideas out of them, like they're quite open in terms of, so if you were thinking about something, that they kind of respond to that? Because I do think there's some work where you get it in front of your camera and the idea in it is so strong that you kind of have to go with that. But do you look at the pieces and you're photographing them, and I'm not expressing myself very well, and you can kind of feel like it will spark lots of thoughts in your mind?
Yes, but I think it has such a strong identity that you can treat it so many different ways. You can make that move, you could have it in silhouette, you could do so much with it.
Yeah.
It's a bit like some of the really, really great models, like Gemma Ward.
Yeah.
Was so beautiful that you could light her with anything. Gemma Ward you could photograph on any camera with any lighting, and she's still beautiful. It's the same thing with these clothes.
Yeah.
There's so much, and you can do so much for these clothes, and they'll still look amazing, and you'll still understand her narrative.
Yeah. Imagine if you got Gemma in that, would that be your dream?
Close.
Thank you.
I won't have macaroon.
And such a very different, I mean, obviously it's always going to be completely different from any other collection, but so many of the collections have been so soft and so unstructured and so kind of almost, not limp, it's not the right word.
Well, they're flaccid, you know.
Yeah, flaccid. Whereas this has got such body. Yeah. It's incredible.
I think that thing that Nick mentioned as well, when you were saying, you know, going into those shops early on, those Japanese brands, and not knowing where to put your arm and which. I love that about those clothes, because you would look at those and just kind of scratch your head and go, you know, it really does. It's a not only an intellectual kind of investigation needed, but a physical one.
I like the kind of history of this collection because, and I think this is just my reading as someone who's studied like British history, but like 18, it almost looks kind of, it's like a mad Tudor queen. You know, I kind of love that historical costume
mixed with a jet plane.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I love about it. Is
it's sculpture, and she's taking all of these different shapes from whatever. I mean, this is phenomenal. I'm going to need about an hour to digest this.
I mean, how lovely would it be to see a really big advertising campaign of this splashed across all the billboards and all the magazines?
You need to just take it and do it for her.
Yes. You do. Oh, look at 22. I just love that.
Yeah, it's amazing.
These hoods.
That collar, just, you know, she always has those collars, and yet they always look sort of new and different somehow. That's just the scale of it against what's going on underneath it, and then the flat at the bottom. So you've got something very structured and very sort of puritanical at the top. Yeah. All this going on in the middle, and then the bottom again. It's
very hard to look at these clothes and say that fashion isn't art. Well, fashion doesn't deserve intellectual recognition that it should get. It doesn't get in the British press.
But you know that in the British press they'll be like, who would wear that? You know?
Yeah, but that's the Observer or the Guardian or the, you know, they don't give it any credence at all.
Yeah. I love.
And they've been saying that for 20 years as well. That's what I always say. Who would wear that? As though, as though the only notion of fashion on a body is about it walking down, the high street.
Yeah. And I do hate that kind of derogatory knock that people give fashion. Ha ha! Look at this. You know, I see it in some weeklies, let's just say, or whatever, and I'm just like, she's talented.
Can I just look at 18 some more, just because I really like it? I find it so happy. It's so beautiful.
I'd love to see how they move.
Yeah, that's the only thing.
I think that's
how kind of rigid are they and sort of.
But that could be.
But it feels like there's a real mix. Like 17, the top with those sleeves is obviously incredibly fluid.
It looks like it's made out of paper or something.
Yeah.
It has got a bit of a Bowie kind of Kanzai Yamamoto thing going on. Like 17, you know, those big trousers that he had, and it has got. A Japanese kind of sort of feeling.
And I love the hair because the hair feels very French. It feels kind of very, you know, almost like Marie Antoinette's huge piled up hair, which was such a kind of, the bigger the hair, the more beautiful thing, and the way it's all kind of tumbling.
Is it Julian Dilys does the hair?
Yeah.
Because he's done the hair for Comme Des Garcons for ages. I sound like it sometimes, I think, but Julian's really done it for a long time.
But the hair is incredible.
Hair's always
recently,
incredible.
It's always incredible. Recently, I think it's been absolutely, you know, the men's, that black twist in front of the face that got so much press, like that wet.
She has never found her image maker, but she's certainly found her hairdresser.
Yeah,
yeah, because I like the Yoji collection, but I wasn't mad on the hair, whereas this hair just looks so right with the collection. Yeah, you're right.
It is like, like you said, a Marie Antoinette. It's like it's always got that punk edge as well, you know.
Well, she's almost like, you know, the Queen of Hearts. She's like this mad queen. I love her. She's an amazing character.
I mean, it's very painting. I mean, they're like in a physical way, they're like living paintings. They look like brushstrokes. And the number 12 looks like it's just disintegrating into kind of. The artist didn't want to finish that part.
There's something quite mathematical as well about it to me. It looks like kind of pattern pieces have been taken and multiplied and kind of, you know, moved around the body in kind of quite new ways, especially because some of the early ones that just look like loads of pattern pieces that have been kind of sewn on.
This is what makes it for me feel very like organic, like it's from the sea. Because it's how like nature would, you know, organically kind of evolve around something in terms of a shell or.
Yeah, you're totally right. It feels like it's grown in a very
in a mathematical way, like nature would grow.
But also this whole talk of 3D printing and people being able to print their own clothes. I mean, this is the sort of stuff that you could imagine 3D printing. You know, if we are, you know, and we're not that far off from, I guess, printing off our own garments. These are the things that you'd hope, you know, people would be printing off.
Yeah, definitely. They just feel this algorithm, you know, this like you said, that kind of there's there's a program, there's a code
Yeah,
to this.
yeah.
But you know that the pattern cutting has been done in a very mathematical way.
Yes.
You can tell, as you said,
Yeah.
with those strips, they're not just strips. That have been sort of-
Yeah.
You know, that she's actually calculated the angle of them exactly right, so that they sit on the body in a particular way.
Yeah.
There's nothing random.
I do also like the familiarity of some of it. It's interesting that we were talking about that flat collection, because just to go back, sorry Lynn, just to that look there, number 6, and earlier on as well, I think it was number 8, and that pink and that red are exactly the same pink and red that we used in the kind of the most, I think it was the opening look from that flat collection. It was the red with the pink splodge on it, and I think it's interesting to see that kind of, like that could be that big flat collection cut up.
Totally.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you look at that, and to me that feels like she's gone, right, I did something that was totally flat and was red and pink, and now I'm going to kind of rip it all up and do something that's all about, because it does feel like this is a lot about movement, you know, like.
And she's playing so much with proportion and shape at the moment, but like you said, that's exactly it. Like, this is the idea of her being in a, you know, this is a great case in point of the process.
Yeah, the process.
Because this is something she's revisiting a piece from another collection.
I really hope that is that exact same piece. And she's
I will say, as much as I really detest all this kind of oversharing of mood boards and references before the show and things like that. I mean, if I ever wanted to, if there was one mood board I really wanted to see, it would be Raised.
Yeah.
Which I'd imagine would totally blow my tiny mind.
Yeah.
I don't think it would have anything on there remotely recognisable to fashion or the body at all. You know, it's so abstract. Maybe even in that very Japanese kind of very philosophical
imagine if you
way
saw
of
it,
thinking.
it was just like the Spice Girls Vogue cover or something like that.
That would be great. That would kind of be amazing.
But you also wonder whether there's an incredible archive that's just so perfectly kept, because coming back to different references and then playing with them again in a different way, I can only imagine there must be a really...
There must be the best
carefully,
archive.
there must be the best
you
kept
have-
archive.
I always do it with collections. I sit and I look at them and I like sit and I'll either go through old like books, or I'll go on Google and I try and look at old collections, and you always see these incredible parallels that you just totally miss.
Yeah.
And it's such a fun thing to do. I hope fashion students do it, because it's amazing. And I know lots of designers you can do that. Miuccia Prada is one of them where you can go and you can find those funny little parallels. But with Com, it's always even weirder. It can be these tiny little details, and it's such a fun game. It's like a jigsaw puzzle.
It's like the Oji exhibition a couple of years ago, where they actually pulled things out from the archive, and I spoke to the curator, who was saying that just how fantastically well kept every single collection been.
Yeah.
I wonder if she's synesthetic.
You're obsessed with that.
Well, I'm fascinated with synesthesia.
Yeah.
And if you look, it's harder to see on these details, but if you looked at the full length looks, they all seem to have a sound to me.
Yeah.
And I wonder if, like Kandinsky, she's a strong synesthete.
Yeah.
Because it feels like there's more than just one sense at play here.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
They do look very musical.
This is what we're doing. You know, we're talking about the mathematical quality of it and the programming. It's like you said, it is more. It would also almost make sense in another language.
Yeah.
Code, or like you said, Nick, that's like sound.
I do feel there's something really, really historical in this one, which is, and I know she always looks at historical, or she doesn't always, but in lots of different collections. But to me, there's a really kind of vivid focus on Western historical costume. It does look like there's a real focus on kind of, Tudor dress in this, but I don't, even just in some of the shapes, and I think the hair and makeup, particularly those lips and the paleness and that kind
There's
of.
a lot of Victoriana, which she kind of, you know, does use a bit, and there's that kind of leather coat that she's got in here that's like ruffles. It's very.
Also, the Duchess satin looks very Tudor, doesn't it?
Exactly, yeah, it really, really
And
does.
that ruffle as well.
But even that square neckline, you know, that on number 6, obviously the shoulders are out, but that kind of neckline and the bodice,
neckline,
and
with the straps.
and the 5, which is almost like a very kind of blown up, messed up crinoline. It's really interesting,
it's
kind
really
of historical.
She has chosen the colour of blood.
Yeah, but it feels like a happy red, doesn't it?
Do you? I don't think. I think incredibly violent.
Yeah, I think it's very violent, but it's kind of a positive in the same way. I don't think this looks. I think that it's quite joyful as a collection. I think. Do you not see that? To use it kind of.
I find the violence exciting.
Yeah.
But I think it feels a very violent collection.
Well,
There's lots of slashing, lots of ripping, lots of
Oh right, it's interesting.
Jack Rippers out there, sort of.
Yeah. 2 looks like an intestine, doesn't it? It looks like all of her
Well, you wanted to
organs.
read it that way. I mean, it's.
But that's what I mean. You can read it like, because I see it as joyful, because I think I'm seeing the costume side. But now you've said that, I am looking at it and going, yeah, it looks a bit like someone's been murdered in their clothes and then bled all over them.
Yeah, I think I think when I first saw the different reds, it did almost look as if some of them were slightly congealed, or some of them were dead and some were alive.
Well, I did I think with the men's panel that I did with Darius was chairing it, and I did say on that, and I'll say it again, there's a real aggression to Comme, I think, all the time. It's quite confrontational, and it's quite, there is a real aggression there. A confrontational kind of, with the slicing and the ripping and the tearing and the different kind of textures that are going on here.
I mean, it's Carrie, isn't it? The scene where the pig's blood drenches her. But it's that. Number one is,
yeah.
And it's interesting because what you were saying before about this idea of anger and people not being angry. This certainly, has a real contrast.
I mean, it's very that. I'm not saying that in a negative way at all. I think there's a lot of...
It's not an insult. Can we just look at one? Because one thing that I just spotted there is that, I can't tell if it's just the light, but it looks like it's a black collar.
Yeah.
And
it could be a bomber jacket or something, maybe.
But it's interesting because there's not... I think unless on the footwear, there's not any black in the rest of the collection,
There's a skirt. Can you see, I think, just below the knee, there's more black. So maybe she's wearing something underneath.
Which is quite interesting that she starts almost as if she's taken all that black from last season, and now she's kind of... I find it interesting to have a little bit of black at the start.
Yeah.
It's almost like kind of a reboot. It's like there's a little bit of a touch of kind of something that was there before, and then it just moves all into all this red. Yeah. It's quite interesting because there's not black kind of slotted in throughout the rest of the collection, so it's almost like this sense of kind of ripping apart something that was there before by leaving that little peak of black. It's quite interesting. I'll probably say this and now there'll be loads more black.
Well, Cristobal Balenciaga used to do that. He used to open with a black look and then build and kind of thing. But for me, it feels very organic, and I think that the blood, like Nick said, I mean, I see totally the violent sort of references, but all these undulating sort of organic shapes, like number 3 and then the 4. I don't know, for me it just feels like life.
Yeah.
I mean, I know death, life, what's the difference?
But it's the same, isn't it? Life and death, I mean, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
And we're reading a very sort of, Western version of that.
Yes.
But it's, the whole transition and turning body inside out and all these things. I do think it's interesting she's chosen that red. It's the same red that Yoji had when I used to work for Yoji back in the 80s. When I did a silhouette, which was a black silhouette and a red bustle.
Yeah.
And a white background. It's very much that red.
Yeah.
Still there.
But I think it does feel like body parts. And number 3, we've gone past. It was almost Frida Kahlo. It's kind of there's something there that maybe is about pain and something to do with the body and hurt and anger. Which yes, it wasn't until you said that, Nick, and suddenly you kind of look at it in another way and you think actually this is something that is very deeply emotional.
But also one of the other things is that we will never know, will we? Because Ray never says.
Or she always says,
like
when everyone said that flat collection was about the internet and seeing images, she was like, no, it's not at all. So she'll probably be like, this was about
and there's something quite
the smell of
wonderful
fresh cut grass or something. And we'll be like, oh.
Yeah, there's something kind of quite nice about that. There's going to be no validation, I guess, for any of our interpretations of what she presented.
I think that's really important. That's why I hate it when I hate press releases at shows, because we've talked about this Dal before. But it's that sense of you read it and you sit down and then you're like, oh, it's going to be about that, and then you don't read it as you would read it blind, because you know that it's about like Matisse, so you look for Matisse and everything. And I find that really boring because it takes away that I'm seeing this in it.
Yeah.
But I think also... Sorry.
I think the press release is... I'm interrupting on interruption. You should interrupt me now, Dal.
I think it's interesting, like they're wearing these welly boots. It has got a bit of an American Psycho. She's got like clear PVC hoods, welly boots. It's like she is off to commit a murder. I'm just tapping into your references.
The welly boots had the polka dots on it as well, because that's such a kind of... You associate that with all the brilliance of the Comme brand.
Yeah.
But then I love that they're on the runway as well. Those little polka
What's going to be in the shop? Sorry to be that person, but how... Because actually, traditionally, kind of quite a lot that is presented does go directly into the store, which I always think is quite amazing.
Top of number 11. If that, I can't tell if it's a top and a skirt.
Isn't it a dress?
I don't know if it is.
But that's what's always quite nice, and for anyone that's never been into Dover Street to see that that will be on a hanger.
Yeah.
It's not it's not reduced and it's not taken apart, and I love that, because you do go in and go, what's that? And this will, and that happens. It's just really fascinating to go and see these clothes.
But I do think they're actually all wearable. I mean, number 14 is wearable. It's you have to have a particular person. I think what you were saying about the press release as well, I think that she is the little bit of interviews I've read of hers, she looks at her art as something that comes to life when it is on a body, when it is on the person, and it's up to that wearer to interpret it in their own way. So she's not going to dictate what something means and how it should be worn. She kind of puts it out there, and yes, you don't get the instruction kit to tell you how to put it on. It's kind of up to you, and there's no right or wrong. And if you decide to put it on inside out or upside down,
well, some of these pieces do look a little bit like they've been turned inside out or upside down or back to front. I
think it's a super interesting collection. I think there's lots of things. I'm very tentative about number 15. What would that say to you?
Number 15. It looks like the Ku Klux Klan, but black, but red even.
Right.
What does it say to you?
Butchers.
What does it say to you now?
I think it looks like menstruation.
Ugh.
But I mean, that's what vaginas is what Georgia O'Keeffe painted all her life.
Yeah.
And menstruation. If you look at, we've been talking to Arvida Bystrom, who's made that point in her work, where she shows girls who have blood-stained pants. So I think these things are, although they're a bit, don't talk about them. Actually, a young Swedish image maker, Arvida Bystrom, is putting that in her work.
There's a great interview with her on SHOWstudio.
So why shouldn't Ray put that in her work?
Yeah,
no, absolutely.
I might be reading it wrong, and it's a slightly I felt a bit awkward saying it, but I think that's, for me, that's what it made me think of.
And this is, we were chatting about this the other day on that other panel that we did, where we talked about censoring sort of fashion and sort of almost kind of like just homogenising it and making it feel a little bit more safe. And actually, I remember when I studied, fashion many moons ago, and I remember Frank magazine had in the 90s some bloodstained knickers and in a shoot of a diary of a model, and then one day 6 she came on a period or whatever. But it was like, I still think about that now, because you don't see that kind of stuff around anymore, that kind of gritty 90s.
No. But I mean, the punk thing, that's what punks at the time, some punks at the time did. So they would wear their tampons on the pins to their jackets.
Ketchup did that at their show. They had blood-stained tampons hanging from trees.
Did they?
Yes.
So we should talk about all facts of life, all parts of life. I don't think there should be taboo areas that nobody talks about.
No, exactly.
I think that if this collection is about blood, and that red colour makes me think of that straight away.
Yeah, and it does
feels like blood.
Pieces look blood-stained as well as blood-red. Just to go back to, sorry, Liam, so 20, but also there are a few before that as well. I think 17 might be it as well. Yeah, so it looks like things that have been stained. Do you know what I mean? Like streaks of something. So it's almost...
But it looks like photographic print on 17.
Yeah.
It does actually look like photographs.
Reminds me of that story I did with Simon Foxton, all the blood splashing.
The skinned monkey.
No, not the skinned monkey actually, but the big story, Big War, where it's actually sort of cartoon version of somebody having their head blown off, which is all sort of red paint. Yeah. But that's what that looks like.
Yeah, it does look like that.
I'm having trouble trying to escape from this very violent. I was sure if she ever explained it, she said, no, it's not about that at all. It's about whatever it is.
That romance,
the opposite.
Love.
Yeah.
But it is, I mean, for her to be always responding to something that's going on in the world, if you think about, things that have happened to women over the last 12 months, you look at Mahala, you look at those images of those hanging women in India, and you think of actually over the last 12 months that there has been a lot of imagery around violence against women. You look recently at the wife
just
of
violence
the,
in general,
of the American footballer, and actually, that if she has got something to say politically about women's role in the world and what's happening to women, this is a very, very interesting way
also,
of her interpreting
what this highlights is that the role, it's now a journalist or a writer's role to
see these things,
to contextualize what this is, especially if a designer isn't going to say that. And I guess one of the frustrations that maybe all of us feel, if I'm speaking for all of us, is that there aren't enough people that can't do that just don't have the platform to do that.
Or won't do that, or don't know how anymore because they haven't been encouraged. I think you're totally right, like no one... I kind of think what a joy to sit here and have all of us have such different interpretations of it, and to be able to look at it and think of it so different. And I'm sure if I look at it tomorrow, I'll think of new things that it makes me think of. And how lovely.
Can we see what people are saying on Twitter about it?
It'll be like lots of pops of red.
But the great thing is like what we were saying about before, that fashion does matter, and we're sat here and we're talking about a bunch of non-fashion, kind of topics. We're talking about violence, we're talking about world politics, we're talking about, feminism and female representation, and a designer is just these kinds of designers, they're more than just designers. They are intellects that are on a level with any other kind of artist or anyone. Like you were saying, Nick, on the other panel about kind of just, you know, you have something to say about the world, and she's just using her collections as that.
And one thing, this is a bit of a, and I can't remember who said it to me, so I'm really sorry if I'm misquoting. It was either Amanda Hollick or it was Camilla Morton, and they talked about showing, and it was in the context of the Izzy Blow exhibition, and they talked, maybe it was you, I don't think it was, and they talked about showing fashion to children, and they said that that was one, they just wanted to take like a group of kids around the Izzy Blow exhibition, because the way and you know, if you took kids around Selfridges, they'd be like, oh, I'm hungry, I want a snack, but if you took them around the Izzy Blow exhibition, they'd like look at all those clothes. And you imagine showing this to children, and the joy they would feel, and the excitement, and I think that says quite
all the fear.
All the fear, exactly. It was
4-year-old
all
Nick.
the emotions you would get. They'd put their heads in it, and they'd be interested by it. And I think there's something really wonderful about that, because then if you showed kids most fashion, they would just like, imagine, you know, people that bring their kids to fashion shows, imagine those kids sit there and they're so bored and they've got a rattle in front of them, and I always think that's quite funny that you've taken a kid to a show and you know that they'll be bored, so you brought them a toy. It's like you wouldn't need to take them anything to that, and I think that's quite funny.
And I think it's about imagination, like just look 18, if we could just go across. I mean, when you really start opening your mind up, you're like, well, they could be like, that one on the left could be a missile or a tampon.
Yeah.
Now I'm opening up to the kind of...
Or it could just be, be like a historical costume.
Absolutely,
Do you know what I mean?
but
I love
it's
that,
the joy of imagining, and that's what children are capable of.
Yeah.
They're just like, oh, that looks like that.
Yeah.
It's a highly provocative colour, red.
Yeah.
And a very interesting colour photographically. It's actually very, very hard to work with.
Yeah.
If you try and see it on Instagram will do a really bad job with that red. Instagram's rubbish on reds, incidentally. But it is a very funny colour to work with. It's also very emotional.
Yeah.
You know, living in a room that's painted red is very strongly emotional, and most people don't choose to do it.
Yeah.
And if you photograph that in black and white, you get the most beautiful black out of that.
Yeah.
Photographing a red in black and white is really gorgeous. That's where my black roses come from, is photographing deep red roses and making them black and white.
Yeah.
And that collection would look just as gorgeous in black and white, weirdly, because of its red. So it's a very interesting collection to work with.
And then, didn't they in lots of black and white films wore red as well, so it came out darker?
Sorry?
In lots of black and white films, black and white movies, they used to wear red, so it looked more...
Yeah.
But it's also why those, like Clara Bow, those early silent actors, their lips were bright red.
Yeah.
That's why they look black.
Yeah.
So.
I think we should just get the whole collection in and get Gemma Ward in and like leave you to your own devices.
That's fine.
Yeah, you'd be so happy.
Yeah, best shoot ever.
Yeah. This is brilliant, isn't it? Because this is what fashion should be. I think we'll agree. We could sit here probably for hours more and keep looking at it and talking about things and eating jelly babies, which is...
And it treats fashion with the respect that it deserves, and that's why she is fashion.
She's brilliant. Should we give her a big, very well-deserved clap?